Hello, SWANA. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're environmental engineering students from the University of Florida. I'm Hannah.
I'm Sean.
I'm Kevin.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Julie.
We're thrilled to present our findings on one of the hottest topics in waste management today, organic waste, with an emphasis on hot. In fact, a 2014 study found that landfills account for approximately 26% of anthropogenic methane emissions in the United States, making them the single largest source of methane emissions in the country. As such, a county in the upper Midwest area of the United States has commissioned a cost-benefit analysis of evaluating two organic waste management strategies, collecting and composting source-separated organics or producing renewable natural gas from landfill gas. Our team developed these 4 scenarios to evaluate the organic waste management strategies on the 3 pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social, and to ultimately come up with a recommendation for organic waste management in the county. Let's get into the analysis. Here you can see the waste composition of the county, with approximately a third of the waste being organics, which could be captured by source-separated collection and composting or the production of renewable natural gas from landfill gas. Scenario 1 serves as a baseline for comparison and represents the current operations of the county, where all municipal solid waste is landfilled in the county's landfill. There will be no economic analysis for Scenario 1 since it serves as a baseline and the county is expected to incur no additional costs from continuing current operations. Here you can see the quantity of waste landfilled in each year, with the waste tonnages after 2022 being projected based on a 3% population growth rate in the county. The period of analysis for our study is from 2025 to 2039, with the 15-year study period being based on the average age of landfill gas energy projects, as well as the IRS recommended period of depreciation for pipeline and electricity projects. While the RNG plant and the composting facility will be operational after 2025, once the current landfill closes in 2032, we are not considering operations of the county's new landfill. To conduct our environmental analysis, we use the EPA Waste Lifecycle Assessment Model WARM for the years while the landfill is operational from 2025 to 2032. WARM considers emissions from waste collection, waste decomposition and carbon storage, landfill operations, and landfill gas flaring. We also use the first-order decay rate equation seen here to calculate fugitive methane emissions from waste in place due to inefficiencies in the landfill gas collection system. The results of our environmental analysis found that the county's annual greenhouse gas emissions are approximately equal to 65,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. This is about the same emissions as over 14,000 passenger vehicles driven for a year. Over the period of 15 years, the county expects to produce over 971,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. As you can see here, after 2032, the greenhouse gas emissions decrease sharply because after the current landfill closes, the only emissions left are from fugitive methane emissions due to that waste in place and the inefficiencies in the gas collection system. We also used WARM to estimate the number of jobs created based on the quantity of waste landfilled. This includes direct jobs which are associated with landfill operations, as well as indirect jobs associated with waste collection and the broader economic impacts of waste management. It's expected that the county currently has 31 employees operating the landfill, as well as an additional 151 employees employed in those indirect jobs. Now I'm going to hand it off to Kevin and Sean to talk about source-separated collections and composting.
Thanks, Hannah. For Scenario 2, we evaluated a program where the county will divert a portion of the organic waste from the landfill, where it is currently being placed, to a composting facility that they would operate. Since the county is interested in source-separated organics, it is at first important that we determine how it will be collected at the point that it is generated. In the solid waste industry, the cost of collection accounts for the majority of the costs of solid waste management. As a result, the collection scheme is vitally important in determining the overall cost of this program. In our research, we found that communities utilize a variety of approaches, including things like establishing all new collection routes with all new trucks and all new personnel that are specifically geared towards source-separated organics, or retrofitting existing yard waste trucks in order to accommodate source-separated organics alongside yard waste. Lastly, there's even an option where you can accommodate more than one waste stream within a single truck by using a split body or multi-compartment truck, which you can see right here in this photo. Now, we don't have a whole lot of information on the county's current collection practices. As a result, what we've done is bracketed the finances between an upper bound where we have a dedicated fleet option and a lower bound where we have a yard waste retrofit option. These are some of the results for the upper bound, the dedicated fleet. We used census data to determine the number of single-family homes that we would be servicing, and we used testimony from waste collection experts to determine the number of stops that a collection truck could make in a day. The number of trucks right here is 2. This would be in the year 2025, and it would steadily increase as we service more of the population. Now, here's a graph that accounts for the annual cost of collection for our upper financial bound, for our dedicated fleet, starting in the year 2025, where we service 20% of the population, and steadily increasing until the year 2029, until where we will be servicing 100% of the population. At this point, the costs drop off because we're no longer purchasing trucks or additional personnel, and will gradually increase as the population increases. Now, this results in a net present value of negative $40 million. So it's easy to see how collection can be the limiting factor. But this is the upper financial bound. We also have the lower financial bound, which in comparison is virtually zero because we have no additional trucks and no additional personnel in our yard waste retrofits. Now, this allows for composting to stand on its own merits. Speaking of composting, I'm now going to bring in Kevin to talk about it.
Thanks, Sean. Now, after SSO collection, the organic waste will be sent to the compost facility located at the current landfill site. The compost facility will be constructed in 2024 and will operate from 2025 to 2039, accepting food waste, yard waste, and compostable paper. We selected forced aeration because many of the programs in place today use it, and it'll provide a conservative estimate as to the cost of implementing a composting program for the county. To estimate revenues and expenses, we used the organics model, and to estimate greenhouse gas emissions, we used WARM. The capital cost of the compost facility was divided into 2 different categories: site development and infrastructure costs, as well as equipment costs. These calculated costs came from a similar facility constructed in the Midwest, but prorated to meet this county's waste stream. As you can see from the table, site development and infrastructure costs include things such as permits and approvals required to operate the facility, clearing and grading the land for construction, and constructing buildings for weighing, mixing, and processing the organic waste. In total, we estimate the site development and infrastructure costs to be about $6.2 million. This table shows the required equipment for the compost facility. It includes things such as blowers and pipes to introduce air into the compost piles, as well as various equipment to screen, move, grind, mix, and weigh the incoming organic waste. We estimate the total equipment cost to be about $3.8 million. Most of the revenue for the compost facility will come from compost sales. In the first year of operation, we project the revenue for the compost facility will be about $500,000, but this grows to a little over $5 million as more organic waste is diverted and processed. That's not all, though. This is what happens when we include landfill airspace savings to the revenue. It's important to note that while compost sales represent actual revenue that'll be realized during the lifespan of the facility, the capital cost of airspace represents the cost of constructing, closing, and the post-closure care of the existing landfill. Our analysis showed that diverting organics will delay closure of the landfill by about 9 months, and this amounts to a net present value of about $1.6 million. This shows the gross profit of SSO composting without factoring in the cost of collection. As you could see, in the first few years, it's a negative gross profit, but over time, it does eventually become positive. And this is due to the large initial capital investment, as well as the low initial organics diversion rate. This results in a net present value of negative $2.4 million and a negative 14.5% internal rate of return. But when we include the cost of collection, the picture changes a bit. Let's have a look. So when we include the cost of collection, our net present value grows to negative $31 million. Despite this, it's important to consider the environmental and social benefits of composting. As you can see from this chart, Scenario 2 produces significantly less emissions compared to Scenario 1, and it'll create 48 jobs through the SSO collection fleet and the compost facility operations. And that's all for Scenario 2, and I'll pass it off to Jordan to discuss Scenario 3 and the RNG facility.
Thank you, Kevin. Now I'll talk about Scenario 3, which involves the county implementing an RNG facility at their current landfill. This scenario gives us two options. The county can either implement the RNG facility themselves and own and operate it themselves, or they can contract it out. In our investigation of Scenario 3, we've had the opportunity to speak with professionals in the field and to visit a renewable natural gas facility at the New River Regional Landfill in Union County, Florida. We used LFG CostWeb for our analysis of the economic impacts of this scenario, and we used a combination of LFG CostWeb and WARM to analyze the environmental and social impacts. Here we have our economic analysis if the facility were owned by a contractor. So as we can see, the contractor would have an initial capital investment of $22 million as well as expenses each year. The contractor revenue would amount to about $11 million a year. The county, on the other hand, would make a 5% royalty payment on the sale of gas and the renewable fuel credits, and this would come out to about $267,000 a year with an overall net present value of a little over $2 million. The county would not have expenses in this case, and that's why this option is favorable. And this is the most common option that we see among RNG facilities at landfills. This option has a net present value of about $34 million. On the other hand, the county could choose to construct and operate the facility themselves. This would mean that the county would need to put up the initial capital investment of $22 million and have expenses each year to operate and manage the facility. Their average annual income would come out to about $15.5 million, which is a good benefit for the county. This would also bring the net present value of the entire facility up to $67 million, and that would be due to the marginal tax rate that would be decreased due to the county's status as a municipality. Now we can look at the environmental analysis. In this slide, we're comparing Scenario 1 and Scenario 3, and we can see that from 2025 to 2031, there's a steady increase in emissions, about 3% each year, as there's a waste generation and a population increase each year. But overall, Scenario 3 always produces less greenhouse gas emissions than Scenario 1. From 2033 to 2039, Scenario 3 produces negative net emissions as the RNG produced offsets the fugitive methane emissions from the waste in place at the current landfill. The total emissions produced from this project over the 15-year lifetime is about 340,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. We estimated that 72 jobs would be created from the implementation of an RNG facility. This includes direct jobs at the facility itself and indirect jobs from the economic ripple effect. Now to recap, if the county were to implement an RNG facility at their current landfill, they would have two options. They could have the facility operated by a contractor, or they could do it themselves. By selling the landfill gas to a contractor, the county would not need to have the capital to construct the facility or have the expertise in producing and marketing RNG. This is a much more common option, and our analysis provides another benefit of allowing the county to solicit bids for contractors based on the knowledge that we've provided them. If the county were willing to take on more of an economic risk, on the other hand, they could increase the net present value of the project to about $67 million. In this case, the county would need to have a $22 million upfront investment cost. They would make about $15 million a year, but this is much less common in practice. Thank you for listening to my discussion of Scenario 3, and now Julie will discuss Scenario 4.
Great, thank you, Jordan. We're now going to look at Scenario 4, which combines Scenario 2 and Scenario 3, meaning we will source separate the organics and divert it to a composting facility in addition to installing an RNG facility at the existing landfill. Let's look at what this does for our numbers. Here we have the economic evaluation of Scenario 4 across the 15-year time period. We can see that for all the years in the 15-year time period, the monetary value is negative, meaning at all points in the project's lifespan, expenses outweigh revenue. That being said, there's a cut in costs starting in the year 2030, and that's because in the year 2030, we successfully incremented organic diversion up to maximum production for the composting facility. If we take the net present value of this entire chart, we get about negative $30 million. If we look at this environmentally, we compared Scenario 4 to Scenario 1. We could see for all of the years in question, Scenario 4 emits fewer emissions than Scenario 1. Additionally, we could see that in the year 2034, emissions become negative, which is the equivalent to sequestering or removing these emissions from the atmosphere. The total amount of greenhouse gas emissions in this lifespan is about 360,000 equivalent metric tons of carbon dioxide. And we also added on this slide our additional jobs created totaling at 120. So now we're going to move into our summary and recommendation. We're going to look at the numbers we talked about side by side, look at the data, and see why we came to the recommendation that we made. Here I have a table with all the different scenarios and their evaluations economically, environmentally, and socially. A few things to point out. We included on this table Scenario 2 and Scenario 4 split up into their least conservative and most conservative assessments. Least conservative assumes the less expensive collection scheme of retrofitting yard waste vehicles, and most conservative assumes the most expensive collection scheme of dedicating a new fleet with new personnel to collection. Also to point out is the environmental row. So up until now, we've talked about the total emissions for each of the projects. In this environmental row, we've actually subtracted those values from Scenario 1. So all these values here are a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. If we look through the numbers now, we can look and see economically, we have 3 negative net present values and 2 positive net present values. Additionally, we could see environmentally that all 5 of these scenarios, all 5 of these variations will reduce greenhouse gases compared to Scenario 1. Finally, we could see that socially, we put in our added numbers. So with all this data, we came to the decision to recommend Scenario 3. Scenario 3 has an attractive net present value at about $2.4 million. Scenario 3 has the greatest reduction in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent at about 630,000 less than Scenario 1. Additionally, Scenario 3 adds jobs to the workforce, about 72 when we consider direct and indirect. We do, however, want to honorably mention Scenario 4, because Scenario 4 can become a positive net present value as the expenses of the collection scheme is reduced. So if composting is important to the county, there is a way for Scenario 4 to become profitable. This being said, we're still recommending Scenario 3 because of the final factor, risk and reward. We understand that the county has to convince many shareholders that this project is worth doing. This is a lot easier done when this project exists in real-world examples. And Jordan shows us that there's an example in Florida, and we know there's some throughout the United States. Having this tangible example that could be toured or interviewed will assure the shareholders that this is a project worthy of investment. So with that, we've reached the end of our presentation, where we looked at our 4 scenarios, how we evaluated them, and why we ultimately recommend Scenario 3 with a contractor-run basis. We'd like to thank all the judges and team at SWANA for being here with us today and allowing us to compete in this competition. We'd also like to thank all the waste professionals on this screen who answered our questions and helped make this analysis as robust as possible. Hannah told us at the beginning that landfills account for 26% of single methane emissions in the United States. We are thrilled to know that there are entities out there that acknowledge this magnitude, and we were so grateful to be on this project working with a county that is actively looking for solutions to this number. Thank you for your time, and we wish the county all the best in their organic waste management decisions.